Well, hello everybody. My name is Roy Cohen. I'll be hosting today's Community Forum show, and I think you'll find this one to be quite interesting and one that kind of affects each and every one of us. Our guests are from the National Weather Service in Norton, Massachusetts, and I guess we'll put a title on this show called Weather and Water at the National Weather Service in Norton, Massachusetts. We're going to be talking about things in the past, current information, things you might want to know about the weather, including what the forecast will be for maybe tomorrow, but not for 10 days down the road. Who knows? Whatever these guys want to talk about, it's totally up to them. On my left, I have Hayden Frank. He's a senior weather forecaster at the Weather Forecast Office in Norton in Boston. And to his left is Edward Capone, service coordinator hydrologist at the Northeast River Forecast Center in Norton in Boston. Kind of a big title, but welcome, gentlemen, to the show, and just relax and tell everything you know. Let's start off, Hayden, a little bit about yourself, and when did you know you wanted to work with weather?
Well, I think I'm like a lot of meteorologists in that from a very young age, we know we love weather, and I wanted to be a meteorologist since I was 5 years old. I grew up in Philadelphia, and I was always fascinated by snowstorms, always looking, when are we going to get one? And being in Philadelphia, they were hard to come by. It seemed like we'd always change terrain, or it would never work out. I remember staying up nights at 2, 3 in the morning when I was 10 years old and waiting for a snowstorm, and it ended up being rain. But forecasts are a lot better today, fortunately. But for me, specifically 1986, 1987, that winter was big for me because we had 2 big storms in January and then 1 big storm at the end of February. And those 3 storms really got me knowing for sure that I wanted to be a meteorologist.
Where do you go to school to become a meteorologist?
There's a lot of colleges that offer degrees in like atmospheric sciences nowadays. So it's usually, for me, I went to Penn State, but any university that offers a degree in atmospheric sciences or meteorology is something that you could do.
It seems that over the last couple of years, when you're talking about weather that's supposedly heading up to this area, it belts the folks down in Philadelphia. They seem to get hit a lot harder than we do. Is there a reason for that?
Well, a lot of things happen in, say, streaks, where, sometimes, Philadelphia and DC can get hit real hard, and then, for another couple of years, New York City and Boston end up getting hit harder. So everything kind of balances out into something what we call climatology. So overall, we tend to get more snow up here than, say, New York City or Philadelphia because we're further north.
Right.
But there are winters where Philadelphia and Washington, D.C. can get a lot more. There was a winter back in 2009, 2010, where Washington, D.C. had more snow than Buffalo, New York, and Caribou, Maine. That's
interesting because Buffalo gets the lake effect storms.
It was a winter where there were a lot of coastals that hit the mid-Atlantic states. So there are unusual things. That's a very rare situation to happen, though.
And those are areas that really can't handle the snow.
Yeah,
you get an inch of snow in Washington, it shuts the whole place down.
Exactly. The further south you are, the less accustomed they are to snow, the less snow removal equipment they have.
They put chains on Air Force One. Ed, tell us about your beginnings with the forecasting.
Yeah, I'm locally from Walpole, Mass, just north here on Route 27 from Stoughton, and I got interested really young also, like Hayden did. I was just over 3, and my father put me into the south window of the Hurricane Carol storm in '54, and I remembered the whiteout there, and then right after that we were hit by Hurricane Edna the same year. And I heard everyone going around calling it Edna. I thought they were talking about me. And it was a few years after that we got hit with Hurricane Donna. So I was interested in observation of the weather and how these things could happen. Maybe I thought we were going to get them every year. So we had the '50s storm, the early '60s, then really didn't get hit quite a ways after that. But if you're 65 to 70 years old and younger, you don't know what a major hurricane is because the last major hurricane was in '54.
What was that, Carol?
That was Hurricane Carol. So I went on to school, the Walpole school system, then Northeastern University as a civil engineer.
Interesting.
And dealt a lot with water infrastructure, designing water infrastructure. And that took me into West Africa where we designed some large dams. So I had to actually set up a weather station in West Africa in order to get some information for this hydrologic portion of the filling of the reservoir, which took 5 years to fill.
Which reservoir?
400-foot high dams in West Africa.
Oh, and over there?
Yeah.
Are they still intact?
Yeah, they're still full, and the satellite imagery is so good today that you can look at them every day and see that they have water in them.
Oh, interesting. Isn't that where the hurricanes get started, out in that area that you're talking about?
Yeah, the West African monsoon kind of blows across something we call the Intertropical Convergence Zone, and that's like between 0 and 15 degrees north coming off West Africa. So yeah, I got to see the origins of what we called easterly waves back in my time as an engineer in West Africa.
Are we done with hurricanes for this year?
Well, Hayden, maybe you want to answer that one.
I'm putting you on the spot.
Well, for New England, I would say so. Still could get tropical development for another few weeks. It becomes much more rare though, and if they do develop, they usually don't reach as far north as we are, fortunately.
Yeah, well, we hope they don't. There's a tremendous amount of damage that can be done with this, these storms, and they spin off tornadoes. They normally do that, don't they?
Some do. It depends. Usually where you get tornadoes with hurricanes is on the east side of the hurricane.
Right.
And they tend to be more frequent further south when they hit the Carolinas in that area because it's warmer. But anywhere, if you're on that east side of a tropical system, there is the risk for that.
What does it mean? There are two centers at the National Weather Service in Raynham and Norton. There's two centers there. What are they?
Well, I'm with the National Weather Service.
Okay.
And we're pretty much handling weather forecasts, public forecasting, aviation forecasting, so visibility for airports, ceiling height for airports. We also obviously have the ocean next to us, so we're doing marine forecasting for mariners, how high the waves are going to get. Is there going to be freezing spray? That's when it's really cold and ice can build up on ships. Our primary mission is watches and warnings to protect lives and property. So if there's any time you hear of severe thunderstorm warning or a tornado warning, flash flood warning, those are all coming from us.
What do you know about clear air turbulence?
Well, it's basically wind changing direction and speed with height, and there doesn't need to be any clouds. So that can cause a lot of problems for planes because you don't obviously see it.
You can't see it through the radar.
You can't see it, exactly. And we know the ingredients that are often present for clear air turbulence, but sometimes you don't know the extreme nature that it can be. And it can cause obviously a difficult situation for pilots trying to navigate around them. But usually once a pilot or two reports it, then other pilots can figure out what elevation that clear air turbulence is occurring at and avoid those areas and keep everyone safe.
So the secret is to keep your seatbelt fastened.
That's why they always put on those lights.
That's something. I remember experiencing it years ago when I was on a flight to California, and it was so bad that I prayed. I thought it was all over. I mean, this plane I was in, I think it was the 707 at the time, before the real big ones these days, and that thing dropped like it's over. But obviously, it wasn't.
Yeah,
because here I am.
Fortunately, I've only been in severe turbulence once, but that was enough for me.
Sure.
It is really a scary experience, and that is why they do tell you to always keep your seatbelt on, because it can happen suddenly and sometimes without warning. But fortunately, a lot of the pilots they're so well trained today that they know what to do, and communication is so good between pilots and the weather service and everything that we can avoid that a lot of times too.
Is there a fixed distance that they try to keep the planes from each other when they're in flight?
Depending on the weather conditions, say visibility, what the weather is, the FAA has different thresholds that require spacing to be larger between airplanes, spacing between landings and takeoffs to be larger depending on the exact weather that's being experienced.
It also, I would imagine, depends on the size of the plane. The bigger the plane, the more turbulence they create.
That's kind of out of my field of expertise, so I don't know what the exactly FAA has the restrictions on based on pilot, on plane size, but that certainly is possible that they restrict different size planes depending on what the weather is going on right now.
You have a slide you'd like us to see?
Well, no, I wanted to tell you a little bit about the River Forecast Center.
Okay, go ahead. I'm sorry.
We're one of 13 river forecast centers across the country, and our river forecast centers are co-located with the weather offices. So our service area here in the Northeast is all of New England and most of New York. So we're forecasting the stage and flow in rivers across New York and New England at about 200 locations. Well, 200 locations means there are thousands of locations with streams, creeks, and brooks and culverts that we don't forecast for. But in another year or two, those forecasts are also going to be made by the National Water Center, which is in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. So they're going to be serving the whole country with river forecasts at 2.7 million locations. And right now through the country, we're only servicing about 3,000 locations.
That's it.
Yeah.
And when you're talking about river forecasting, do you take into consideration snow melt, rainstorms and stuff like that,
Right.
when the rain accumulates on its way down?
Yeah, it's not only the rain, it's snow and temperatures. We put in our models the temperatures, how much water equivalent is in the snow, how it's going to melt. And one of the phenomenons we see here is we have something where over 2,000 feet we could see a different climate there than at the ground during some of these events where it might be snowing at the top of mountains and raining at the bottom.
Sure.
Or vice versa. And that all has to be included in our models as far
How
as...
often do you see rain at the top and snow at the bottom?
There were times when we call cold air damming, will get locked into the low areas and warm air will override the tops, and you'll see a warmer environment up at the top of mountains. That does happen. It's not as common as the other case, but we do see that occasionally. So
these various areas, various rivers that you're talking about, are they equipped with sensors which transmits information back to you?
Yes, we partner with the U.S. Geological Survey, and they have all the sensors set up, and they're remotely triggered right into our forecast system. Minutes, 15-minute intervals, hourly. So they're telling us what's going on with the river and how good our forecasts are going. So it's their database that we're using to get and verify some of our forecasting.
Before we get into some other questions that we want to ask, I'm curious as to what your feelings are about what's going on in the West Coast with all the Santa Ana winds. What are the Santa Ana winds, and how do they relate to the mountains, and how do they relate to the fires that are going on? I mean, can you offer any opinion on that?
Sure. Well, what happens is if you look at the West Coast of the United States, the California area, if they have a situation where they have strong east winds, you have the Cascades, a lot of big mountains out in California, and that wind, as it goes over the mountain, it comes down the mountain into the lower elevations, and as that air descends, it warms and dries up. So that creates what we call low relative humidity. On the East Coast, we tend to have a lot of high humidity, especially in the summer. Well, this is kind of the opposite effect. And given the land makeup there with these forests, the way the land is, and you have that strong east wind coming down, if there are fires that are ongoing, it's very easy for them to spread, and it's difficult to maintain them.
You're talking about fires, and the end result of the fires are it burns up all the vegetation on the ground, and as a result of that, when they do get a lot of rain, you then have a tendency of having mudslides.
Yeah, you have a tendency with the mudslides after that burn.
Yeah.
But another thing that's pretty interesting is they have a wet and dry season. Unlike here, every month we rain about the same amount, around 4 inches a month. There they'll have a wet season, dry season. And if they have a really wet season where they have a lot of vegetation, once that dries out into their dry season, that's more to burn. So
In other words, you're talking about leaves
yeah,
growing in
right.
the trees.
So this past spring, they had quite a bit of rain. So there was an outlook saying they could have quite a burn season if they get one of these Santa Ana wind situations, because there's so much more vegetation to burn.
Yeah,
as
and
it
it's
dries
doing
out.
it.
It's doing it.
It's unbelievable. And they're able to hold the fire back. I mean, there's thousands of firefighters. Are they able to control the fires or prevent them from really getting bad, or what's the story there?
Well, from what we see on TV, it looks like they're getting a lot of help from aircraft dropping water and
Yeah, and retardant.
So it's really a function of the relative humidity and the wind speed. That has a lot to do with it.
Unbelievable.
So they have, the Weather Service will put up something called red flag warnings
Yeah,
in that situation.
and even when they can control the fires, the embers are airborne, landing a mile or two later on, setting fires off someplace else, burning down houses.
It's very difficult. I mean, they can obviously contain it to some degree in some fires, but if the weather conditions are too difficult with that real low relative humidity and those real strong east winds, it's really impossible to maintain them. And that's why it's such a difficult situation for those folks.
Yeah. What have you got there, Ed?
Yeah, maybe we could go on to some other memorable storms in the
Sure.
Northeast. We could start talking a little bit about snow.
Sure. You have a slide there that you want us to put up?
Yeah, I do. This one
Okay.
here.
There it is. Is that it right there? Memorable historic Northeast storms?
Well, that one there is the hurricanes we talked about earlier. Those were I call them the Seven Sisters. Back in the 50s and 60s, the East Coast was pummeled with hurricanes. And if anyone remembers 1960, Hurricane Donna had hurricane force winds from Florida to Maine. The only hurricane ever to do that in all the East Coast states.
Really?
And it was quite a storm. It went just to the west of Stoughton.
Thankfully.
Well, the thing is with these storms is they're all characteristically, to the left of the center is the heavy rain, to the right is the big wind.
Yeah. There seems to be a pattern. I mean, it's a constant pattern. They start off down south, and then they all curve together going up north.
Yeah, most hurricanes that we see that strike New England tend to start in the southern waters where the water temperature is warmer. Ideally, you want the water to be over 80 for hurricanes. So you're not going to get a hurricane developing in our area. It's going to develop, further south in that warmer water. And a worst case scenario for us is when the hurricane accelerates to the north at say 40 or 50 miles per hour, because it doesn't get a chance to weaken over our colder waters.
Right. And they do that.
And when you see the track to the north, it's really the way the Earth is trying to balance the temperature regime. It'll take that heat from the tropics and bring it towards the poles. And that happens every year in this ocean, in the Pacific, and it's constant. So there's not an overheating.
Are we experiencing the warmth from the tropic these days? I mean, today, everybody's going to be watching this show for a week or two from this point on. But today being October 31st, are we experiencing, with the high temperatures, is that coming from the tropics?
Yeah, we're basically in a southerly winds right from the Gulf of Mexico.
Yeah.
So that's why it's so warm and humid for this time of year right now.
Nice.
Nice break, but it's going to come to an end.
You think so?
Yeah.
Is that a promise?
It's a
From
promise.
From the weather forecaster.
It's a promise.
Okay.
So we can maybe go on to the next one with some snowstorm
Sure.
slide.
There you go.
One of the other things that got me interested in observing weather is back in the 60s we had some tremendous snowstorms. Back when John F. Kennedy was his inaugural, we were all sitting at home in Walpole on black and white TV watching the inaugural because we had a 1 to 2 foot snowstorm move through the area.
This area.
This area here.
Not in Washington.
Not in Washington. Well, Washington also got hit with it, but it was all the way up to here. In the late 60s, if people remember 1969, we had 3 major snowstorms in February. I went to school 5 days in February because it was everything was canceled. Three
Couldn't get
blizzards. Three, and the last one was called the famous 100-hour storm, where Boston recorded snowfall for 100 straight hours, which is pretty unusual.
Yeah.
Don Kent used to call that a 3-day nor'easter, that type of thing. But usually a lot of the storms we get, they're in and out, and they're not going to last 100 hours. And then, of course, we have the blizzard of 78. I don't think people realize that in a 2-week period from the blizzard of 78 previous in January, we had 9 inches of waterfall, and we had Boston's record snowstorm on the 21st of January that year, before the later one. I was working at 1 Beacon Street, Boston, and it was a Friday afternoon. My wife called and said, "How come you haven't left yet?" So I left around 12:30, 1 o'clock, and my bosses were kind of like, "Where are you going?" I was a young engineer then, and I felt kind of weird leaving, but I left. Monday morning I came in, and my boss come over to me, and I said, "Something's really strange here." Well, none of them got home. They lived at that building for the weekend.
Wow.
So he said, "The next time there's a snowstorm, tell us, we're all going to leave early." So in between the 2 big snowstorms, January and the blizzard of 78, was a major rainstorm, because we were on the east side of, I think they called it the Cleveland
The
Bomb.
Cleveland bomb, yep.
It was a tremendous snowstorm for Cleveland. So we missed that one. We were on the wet side. And we melted almost all the snow that was on the ground from the 21st.
Yeah.
And then a week later came the blizzard of 78. And that was on a Monday. But Friday previous to that, they were talking about measuring snow in feet. Bob Copeland on Channel 5, I remembered. But Monday came, it wasn't snowing, so everybody went to work. I was back in Boston, 1 Beacon Street, and my wife called and said, "You know, there's already 6 inches of snow on the ground here." Well, it hadn't started snowing in Boston. And the bosses were getting worried, saying, "When are we going to leave? Are you going to make the call?" I made the call. I left. I got to South Station. If anybody's familiar with South Station, it was completely packed with people. You couldn't even get to the train, there were so many people.
Really?
So I ended up taking the Providence line home through Canton Junction in Mansfield. I took an Amtrak. It was the last train that left Boston. And if you remember the old 128 station, I was the last one on the train, so I was the first one off to let everyone off at their stations. If you remember the old 128 station, there was no parking garage. When we got out there, people were literally screaming because you could not see 100 feet in front of you.
Wow.
The visibility was that bad. And then we get to Mansfield, and of course a couple of my neighbors were there, and none of us had a ride home. So we ended up walking most of the 5 miles home.
Oof.
And well, I remembered at about 5 p.m. that night when I did get home, we had thunder snow for about 45 minutes. And if you ever watched the Weather Channel, Jim Cantori would have been out of his skin with the amount of thunder snow we had in that 45 minutes. We had about 5 inches of snow in an hour. And where I lived in Norton then, moved to Norton, just east of 95, the snow was wetter. It was like a 32-degree snow. So it pasted everything in an hour. And then things were shut down for about a week after that storm.
What's the difference between thunder snow and thunderstorms that happen during the summer?
Well, they're actually very similar, but there's what we call in meteorology less instability. And when we say that, there's less fuel for the thunderstorms, so you don't get, you know, the tornadoes or say the damaging winds you do get with thunderstorms in the summertime. But what you do get is extreme snowfall rates. You know, if you're driving through a thunderstorm, you know, may last like 2 minutes, but you can't see. You know, with snowfall, you'd be getting 5-6 inch per hour rates on occasion.
Blinding.
Yeah, exactly.
Oof. So that takes care of the blizzards. What is, I don't think I remember a Stoughton tornado, unless that's the one that hit up in the Bay Road area?
Yeah, there was a very weak tornado.
EF0 or something?
It was EF0 back in 2013. It was May of 2013. It was a very weak tornado and very localized.
Is there such a thing as a weak tornado?
Yeah, you know, generally the classification would be an EF0, and that have winds roughly from 65 to 85 miles per hour. This was on the lower end. And what we always tell people with severe weather, say damaging thunderstorms with wind, we can have straight line winds of say 80, 90 miles per hour. Or you could have a very weak localized tornado with winds of 65 miles per hour. So just because it's a tornado or a severe thunderstorm doesn't necessarily mean the amount of damage is going to be more extensive or less extensive. It all depends on the situation. And by saying that, I mean if you have a very weak tornado compared to a line of thunderstorms that can result in a large area of wind damage, that's much worse.
How much flack do you put up with when a forecast goes awry?
Well, as a meteorologist and someone who works for the National Weather Service, we try to put out the best product and information we can, for the protection of life and property. And when something doesn't work out, we always review the event, and we call them events, whether it's a snowstorm or something of that nature. We're going to review it and look into it and see, what we saw, what we could improve on, how we communicate that information. But we're always respectful to anyone, no matter what the situation is, because we try to do the best we can.
You're forecasting a major storm, a major event, and it goes off a couple of degrees. So all this staying at home that went on that day because of the forecast, they say, well, why do we stay home? I mean, there was nothing. And then they point at you and say, you did it.
There was a specific case in February of 2010 where a blizzard hit Washington, Philadelphia, and New York City, and up in New England we were spared. We had rain mixed with snow during the day and ended up accumulating just a couple inches at night, and we were expecting a much more significant snowstorm. And after that event, we looked at things and kind of reviewed the case and said, how could we do things differently? And we looked into and started doing probabilistic snowfall forecasting. So we'll forecast what we're expecting, but we also say what is a reasonable worst case scenario and say a best case scenario. So for example, we may be forecasting for the area, let's say we're forecasting 8 inches of snow, but the worst case scenario would be 16 inches of snow, and maybe the best case scenario would be 4 inches of snow. So that tells folks we're extremely confident there's going to be at least 4 inches of snow, and you're going to need to plow. Mm-hmm. And that can really help people, especially say emergency managers, road crews, people that have to make those decisions.
Who is more accurate, you guys or the Bob Copelands of the TV series?
Well, we look at it as a team effort. Our job is, we're government employees, federal government employees, and our main job is the protection of life and property. Mm-hmm. But we're communicating with each other. We're communicating with emergency managers, town officials, to get the best product out there to the public and the people that need it most, those who are going to have to clean the roads. So we don't look at it in that sense, but we just do the best we can and look at it as more of a team effort.
Mm-hmm. And you guys, I hope, prevail.
Well, as long as everyone gets the information they need, that's how we look at it.
I look at these guys on the Today Show, for instance, with Al Roker or some of these other people. They get panicky when there's a possible storm. They tell you that there's so many millions of people that are going to be impacted by whatever's going on. I mean, they get crazy.
Well, they're looking at it from more of a national view, so they're covering an extremely large area. Our office, we're really focused on southern New England, so we're giving more specific information in that mm-hmm. sense to that area, where they're looking at it, as the whole United States.
Ed, what have you got now?
Yeah, maybe we could go to the slide talking about the hydrologic cycle.
Sure. There it is.
I did want to bring it up that Norton actually had one of those weak tornadoes a year ago this month, right near our office.
That's right, October 23rd, I believe.
Yeah. Yeah, so what we're doing at the River Forecast Center is we're developing our own models and really mimicking this old concept of the hydrologic cycle. So we've got meteorologists, hydrometeorologists, hydrologists, groundwater hydrologists, geologists working at the water center. And we're looking at everything that evaporation into the cloud system, the storm system type that's coming in. Not only how much is it going to rain, we have to know how much is it going to rain over a watershed or a water body and the intensity of that rain.
How can you tell? How can you tell how much rain is going to come out of a cloud?
Well, we can tell from the weather models themselves. We also have our precipitation algorithms that tell us how much it's going to rain.
Oh,
And then we
okay.
look at the radar to see if it's matching up with, say, the first 6 hours of the computer model. So
Interesting.
we look at that, and then we can figure out how much is going into groundwater, how much is going into the lake systems, how much is running through the pipes and channels, say in Stoughton, with the new water center model, and getting into the main river systems and out into the ocean.
Oh, okay. There's occasionally you hear about the Blue Hill Observatory. What's the story with that? I mean, is that another weather station that we have to work with?
That is another weather station. They have observers up there, and they have automated stations there. It's been continuous weather record since 1886. I spent 2 years of weekends up there doing observations. They have a lot of older equipment that works well and some new equipment.
Older meaning what? 1800s?
They have, I think, a mercurial barometer back in the late 1800s.
That's amazing.
It still
I
works.
remember seeing it, and still good these days. It still works.
Yeah, when I was up there, they had something called an umbroscope, which when any type of precipitation hit it, you could tell when the precipitation event started, but you could also tell by the trace it left what type of precip it was. Was it sleet, hail, drizzle, heavy rain? So that was
Wind?
They have 3 or 4 wind systems up there.
Uh-huh. Is that a besides being as high as it is, and there's a beautiful view from there on a clear day of Boston and way out. Is that something that the average person can go up and visit?
Oh yeah, the average person can go up there and they can go up and request a tour. They can go and hike there.
Should they call and make an appointment?
Yeah, they should call. It's everything's on the internet for the Blue Hill Weather Observatory.
Uh-huh. Very good. Do you guys relate? Do you converse with the local meteorologists? I mean, to give them the facts from which they create the weather maps and give their forecast?
In terms of speaking of the television meteorologists, yeah, we communicate with them. We have a certain chat server that we go back and forth on. We'll talk on social media, but we all do our own forecasting. So because our job, we're as I said, federal employees. Everything we do is available to anyone who wants to use that information.
So basically, if somebody wants to change the station from one to another, they're going to hear pretty much the same thing from every one of them?
Well, it's up to them. They could take what we have and modify it. They could go with something different in terms of the forecast. That's totally up to them. We share with them what our forecast is, what our thinking is, but that's up to them. The only thing that we do when you hear a watch or warning, whether it's a winter storm warning or a high wind warning, that comes from us. So we're the agency that does that because protection of life and property is our mission.
And you do a good job.
Oh, thank you.
Okay. I mean, you're still working for them, so you must be doing well. If anybody wanted to take a ride by your office in Norton, they would notice that there's a big ball on top of the building.
Exactly.
What's going on with that?
That is called our Doppler radar. And basically what it does is it spins around and shoots out beams of energy at different elevation angles. And from there, we can see where it's raining, we can see where it's snowing. The big difference between Doppler radar and older conventional radars is not only can we see where it's raining or snowing, but we can see the winds within a storm.
Really?
And yes, and that is key for tornado detection, because a tornado, especially a strong tornado, you see very strong winds going away from the radar and very strong winds going towards the radar. When we see them next to each other, that gives us an idea that there might be a tornado developing.
Is there a need for what these stations have? I mean, they got their own little private radar on top of a truck that they drive to a location to maybe get more centralized predictions underway. Is there a need for that, or can anybody get what they need from yours?
Well, the more information you have, the better. Our radar is designed to cover all of southern New England. Different stations, different universities have various forms of Doppler radar. Some are doing it for research, some are doing it for their local area. So the science behind those radars is the same, to detect where it's raining or snowing, or detect where there's severe weather might be occurring.
Is there is your radar? I'm trying to get the question out. Is the radar affected by clouds? I mean, does the image is the image inhibited by the clouds in the sky?
Yeah. So depending on where the clouds are and how the radar's sampling, the radar is just a computer. So it can pick up clouds in the sky. You could think that's rain or snow, depending on how high the clouds are. Occasionally you can see birds migrating south for the winter time on the radar.
Really?
Yeah. It's just shooting out a beam of energy, so whatever is in the sky, it's going to pick up.
It blocks the image.
Yeah, so it's going to come back as, say, rain or snow. But through different techniques with the radar and experience, we can tell what's a real return.
And maybe we'll want to look at the slide of Stoughton and local watershed, and where's the water?
Why not?
Where's the water going in Stoughton? We'll show you that.
Hopefully into the individual houses. There you go.
Yeah, so, well, this is one of the images, but Stoughton is broken up so that the northern part of Stoughton, the water all sheds off into the Neponset River system, which ends up in Boston Harbor, the Atlantic Ocean. The southern part of Taunton that I have, of Stoughton, you see there, the water all ends up in the Taunton River watershed, which ends up in Narragansett Bay. The two stars I have on the map are where the official forecast points are from the Northeast River Forecast Center, one in Norwood, Mass on the Neponset, and the other in Bridgewater on the Taunton River. So you can see in Stoughton itself, we're not currently doing any river forecasting for it. You don't have any big rivers here. But if you go to the next slide, you can see that the new water model, the national water model, as part of the 2.7 million locations in the country, all the tributaries and lakes that you have water moving through, you can go in and click on one of those, even at a culvert crossing on any of the streets, and you can get a forecast hydrograph, which is a time displacement of the flow in the river, and eventually inundation mapping, which is going to be showing the extent of what's flooded in each river system for each storm. And our office in Norton has been targeted as the second group of offices in the country to have this done. So within the next year, we'll be producing our first level inundation mapping on all the streams and rivers in our service area, including the ones in Stoughton.
You're showing the water flowing in two different directions. Is that dependent on the elevation?
It's all dependent on elevation, plus your piped systems in the town where they're bringing water to. But basically, right through the center of center of Stoughton is the cutoff between water going to the Neponset River or the Taunton River.
We have our own continental divide.
You do, you do.
How lucky.
You can see it on the high resolution topographic maps also.
Very good. What kind of background do the people at the center have? Are they all meteorologists, or what is the background?
No, we range from, certainly we have meteorologists, and their forecasters do the hydrometeorology and the forecast of rainfall in the watersheds, but we have civil engineers, geography types, geologists, environmental engineers, also besides hydrologists.
Sure. Interesting. Do you have another slide you want to talk about?
Well, we can go to some of the flood changes with the flood climate in the last few years. We can go to those.
There it is.
Yeah, what we've noticed across the Northeast, we've had some tremendous flooding in the past 10 years. Lake Champlain in 2011 reached the highest level it ever reached in the past 120 years. And then back, Hayden was talking a little bit about 2010. We couldn't buy a flake of snow in 2010 due to certain what we call teleconnecting weather patterns. And when that pattern released in March, We had record rainfall for the month of March in southern New England, even surpassing the 55 Hurricane Connie and Diane rainfall. So it was 15 to 20 inches of rain in a month.
Yeah.
And we had tremendous flooding in Rhode Island, record flooding, without snowmelt in March, which is pretty hard to do. Produce a record snowmelt without record flooding without snowmelt.
One thing that Ed brings up is a good point, the flooding in northern New England of 2011. A lot of that was done by a tropical storm called Irene. And we had wind damage from that in southern New England. But a lot of times with these tropical systems, the rainfall and the flooding part of it gets kind of underrated or undervalued, I guess, by a lot of people. They're thinking of the wind and the storm surge, but you don't have to be near the center of the storm to experience severe impacts. In Irene, the worst impacts are way northwest of Irene into northern New England, Vermont, New Hampshire. That area was devastated with 5 to 10 inches of rain that fell over a very short period of time, resulting in a lot of flash flooding.
Where does that 5 inches or more rain, where does it go?
Well, Ed could probably talk more about that.
It comes south, I would imagine.
Well, in Vermont, if your eastern part of Vermont ends up in the Connecticut River system, the western part of Vermont ended up in Lake Champlain, that system. One of the things we did see, because we're forecasting the Hudson River up to Albany, 150 miles of the Hudson River is tidal. And we were told that it's so rare to get a flood from river flow, freshwater flow, through the Hudson River because it's just so wide and so tidal. In Irene, we got a tremendous, moderate flood at Albany and Poughkeepsie due to river flooding. It flooded up, it filled that whole river. A year later, when Sandy came, was it a year or two later, when Sandy came?
Yeah, 2012.
There was basically very little rain there, and they got tremendous tidal flooding all the way up to Albany. So we had two systems creating two major floods, completely different characteristics of the flooding. One strictly tidal, with the salt salinity all the way up to Albany, and the other one was a riverine interior river flooding on a major system. Yeah, so we're forecasting the Connecticut River is one of our bigger rivers,
Right.
from the Canadian border down. If you ever get a chance to go to the Fourth Connecticut Lake, that's where the river starts.
Right.
It's quite a place. And that Penobscot River is another large river of ours.
That leads to a lot of water supply along the way, I would think, for different cities and towns.
Yeah, different cities and towns will tap
They
off of it.
tap into it?
Yeah. In fact, the old Quabbin system,
Right.
if you look back when Quabbin was really worried about getting low in the 60s,
Yeah.
there was some, they don't have it now, but originally when that was built, they could have tapped off the Connecticut River, which they've never done, in case Boston ever got low with water. But
Why didn't they?
they never had to, because right now Boston is using as much water out of the Quabbin as they did 100 years ago. Yeah, there's no, and that's true with a lot of water supply reservoirs.
With all the building that's going on in
Yeah.
Boston, they're not using an excess amount of water?
No, they're using the same amount. The Quabbin's using about the same. They've tightened up their system, plus the water, the conservation measures they put on, they're using about the same amount, of delivering the same amount now as about 100 years ago.
Taking care of the leaks?
Yes. And the conservation was a big part of it also.
Yeah, because if you wanted to go into Boston along the waterfront area where the Pier 4 used to be, there's buildings like crazy. I don't know if you've seen them or not.
I've seen them, yeah.
Those are when they open up. I mean, they're not opened up yet. But when they open up, people are going to be doing a lot of washing of their faces and toilets and stuff like that.
Right.
The usage has got to go up.
What we found out with the Quabbin was, you'll hear about a drought after a big summer of no rain. You'll hear, with drought, we got to stop watering lawns. We've got restrictions on these groundwater wells. But the Quabbin can basically go 2 years without rain, and they still have enough water for Boston.
Really? There's a
Yes.
river in there's a body of water in Waltham, which I imagine, I see the sign, something about it's Cambridge water supply. Do you know anything about that?
We know something about it. But
I've seen that thing down to rocks. A couple of years ago, it was down to rocks.
We had a multi-year drought, late 15, 16, early 17.
Right, but it's back.
And that drought started right when Boston got its huge winter of 90+ inches of snow. The drought started right after that.
Amazing.
And even that snow didn't have much water in it. We were talking about that earlier. So
Light snow.
it was very dry snow. It was 25 to 30 to 1. The ratio is usually 10 to 1, 10 inches of snow for 1 inch of water.
Right.
This was like 25 to 30 to 1.
Really?
I called it Labrador snow because every snowstorm we got was dry snow that you could blow over the roof of your house. It was so dry
Yeah.
when you would clean your driveway.
What was interesting about that winter was that we didn't have any snow until the end of January, and then we got over 90 inches in 30 days. And what was unusual is it didn't warm up. Usually you get a snowstorm in Boston, and it'll rain, and maybe a little more snow. This was snow after snowstorm after snowstorm, so it just kept piling up.
No place to put it.
And what was
Yeah,
interesting,
that was a big problem for parking.
hydrologically, what was interesting with that is all the storms had maybe 3/4 an inch to 1.25 inches of snow. It just kept piling up. The blizzard of '78 had almost 4 inches of water in that, so it was a much different type of snow. Hard to move, everything was stopped.
Right, for sure. What is, I see a question here about new water services for Stoughton. What is that about?
Well, the new water services is what I was just showing you about. The flooding right now, we're doing flood forecasting on the Neponset River in Norwood, and we're on the Taunton River in Bridgewater. We're not really doing any forecasting for flooding per se in Stoughton. But the new water model is going to cover these 2.7 million river reaches, and many of them are right down to the street level. So you can click on your mouse at a culvert in Stoughton, and you can get what type of flow is going to be in that brook, and eventually in another year or two, the inundation map to show the extent of flooding that will create. So that service is coming.
What do you know about the maintenance of the water supply? In other words, the dredging. Should they be dredging the water supply? I know we went through this in Stoughton several years ago, where we had a builder who was working on the, I think the expressway or the Big Dig or something. He was willing to come in and dig out the soil from some of the ponds at no charge to the town, which would have increased the capacity of the ponds, just for the material. And yet that was, it was voted down by town meeting because the poor guy that was doing all the work was going to make money.
Well, the same thing happened in Norton with one of the reservoirs in Norton. That's a little bit out of our expertise here.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it sounds good to create a bigger hole to store more water in. But once you're full and you get another storm coming in, that storage is, it's really insignificant.
The same thing, I think, happened on that body of water in Attleboro that you see from Route 95.
Right.
They were going to dig that out, and somehow it got stopped.
Yeah, but, well, because there's a lot of issues with the quality of the material coming out, where they're going to store it or whatever, but a little bit out of the Weather Services expertise lane.
Well, it's something you can look into for the next time we get you on the show. I think I want to take a quick break. We have some public service announcements that we're going to show, and then we'll end up with some more questions for you. So we'll be right back. Hi, this is Roy Cohen. The crew would like to thank Maxie's Delicatessen, located at 117 Sharon Street in Stoughton. You can reach them by calling 781-341-1662. The American Cancer Society is looking for volunteers to drive cancer patients to and from treatments. You can volunteer by calling 1-800-ACS-6662 or online at www.cancer.org. Ilse Mock's Food Pantry and St. Anthony's Free Market is located at 2 Park Avenue in Stoughton. For more information, call Christine Gallagher. That's 781-341-0611 or 781-341-0549. To get involved with Meals on Wheels, call Jessica at 781-344-8882, extension 2. The Stoughton Penny Saver. Our business is advertising your business in Stoughton. To advertise, call 781-344-4833. Community Forum showtimes here in Stoughton. You can see it on Thursdays, Fridays, Saturdays, and Sundays at 6 p.m., Monday at 8 p.m., Tuesday at 5 p.m., either on Comcast Channel 9 or Verizon Channel 28. If you have any comments or suggestions, contact us at communityforum1@yahoo.com. Samaritans, 41 West Street, 4th floor in Boston, Massachusetts, 02111, or call them at 617-536-2460. The 24-hour helplines, 877-870-HOPE or 877-870-4673. Samaritans, 800-252-TEEN or 800-252-8336, or online www.samaritanshope.org. For you bingo players, I want to tell you about the Monday night bingo being held at the Ahava Torah Congregation, 1179 Central Street in Stoughton. The doors open at 4:30 p.m. The games start at 6:30 p.m. You come on down and win some money. They have two big prizes. One is $1,199 and the other one is up to $3,000. So come on down. Well, we're back, and we have with us Hayden Frank. He's a senior weather forecaster at the Weather Forecast Office in Norton, Boston. And Ed Capone, he's a service coordination hydrologist, Northeast River Forecast Center, also in Norton and Boston. And I think the next thing I'd like to cover with you, it's obviously, especially today or this week, it's been raining more, seems like for the last few years than in previous time. Is that true, or is it just a figment of my imagination?
Yeah, well, I operate for the National Weather Service, a climate station, a co-op observer station in Norton, Mass. And I've had it for 45 years. And at the beginning of that, the average rainfall, annual rainfall in southern New England in this area was around 42 inches of rain a year. Now it's around 52 inches, so we've increased with the annual rainfall. In fact, NOAA, National Weather Service, has updated their precipitation atlases to show the extreme rainfall events. In the coastal plain from Connecticut to Maine, the rainfall is greater than it was back in the 60s. Last year, we had a record annual rainfall of 73.5 inches in this area. With 22 days, they recorded 1 inch or more. The normal is like 12 days, so it was really wet the past year.
That messed up the summer vacations.
It did, especially last fall, it really got wet.
Yeah, interesting. You have other slides you'd like to talk about?
Well, we have the slide, the common theme to the recent floods.
Yep.
You might have heard that this slide I have up here is basically talking about something we call atmospheric rivers. And you probably heard about the Pineapple Express coming into California.
Hawaii?
Right.
Originating from Hawaii or something?
It's really bringing some heavy streamers of precipitation off the tropics into the mid-latitudes. So when Hurricane Harvey came, they had something called the Yucatan connection.
Really?
The water was coming off the Yucatan. And then we get our heavy rains from either those connections or right from the tropical Atlantic or the tropical Caribbean. But when we see something like this forming with the models and on what we call a water vapor imagery, we can get anywhere from 3 to 8 inches of rain in 1 to 2 days. So our concerns get really risen when we see these atmospheric rivers, these ribbons of heavy moisture moving towards New England.
That doesn't really show it, I don't think it shows it in Southern California, is it?
That's not in Southern California now.
It's lower.
It's lower. But last winter was interesting. They had all the flooding in the upper Midwest.
Yeah.
That pineapple connection through Northern California into the upper Midwest was very active. They had dozens of storms last winter.
Interesting. Are there opportunities for employment within the National Weather Service? I mean, if some other people are sitting there saying, gee, I like listening to these guys talk about the weather. Maybe I can go to work there. Is there a possibility?
Well, since we're part of the federal government, our office doesn't hire directly, but the jobs are advertised on usa.jobs.gov, and anyone could go to that website and do a search on available jobs in a specific area that they're looking for.
be your partner.
Sure. More people that can help, the better.
And one thing, we work 365. Their office is 24/7. We're like 18/7. But if there's any big flooding event, we're 24/7. So you've got to work Sundays, holidays, and all the days of the week.
Got to be there to tell the stories.
Yep.
Yeah, so on our side, we always have at least 2 forecasters there 24/7. The weather doesn't know when to take a holiday off or
It doesn't take a holiday?
no. And I've got my overnight shifts coming up, so we work 7 in a row of those.
Got to keep the information flowing to save lives.
Exactly.
Go ahead, talk about the aging dams in the
So,
last couple of minutes.
One of the things, the nation gets a report card every year on their infrastructure. And when it comes to waterways and dams, the American Society of Civil Engineers puts it out every year. And we're interested at the Weather Service with dams because our mission is to forecast flooding on a river. Some of the biggest floods that could occur would happen if a high hazard dam were to fail. And in our area, we have about 600 high hazard dams. And they're dams that, if they did fail, would cause a loss of property and life.
Sure.
So a dam can be 10 foot high and be a high hazard dam, depending on what's downstream of it. So what we've seen with dam failures across the country, there's around 95 to 100,000 dams in the catalog. Many of these failures are occurring with overtopping, which means they're precipitation driven. So with extremes in precipitation, we have seen more dams failing.
Right.
So
It's not good. Okay, Hayden Frank, this is your information if you want to get in touch with him. Hayden's a senior meteorologist, outreach and Doppler radar in marine weather focal point at the National Weather Service in Boston Norton. Telephone number is 508-622-3250 or online www.weather.gov/box. We also have another one for Ed, I believe, but it's similar information. I want to thank you both for coming in. It's been very informative. It's been a while to get you in here, but I'm glad we got you in here, and there's Ed's information if you want to get in touch with him also. And I'm glad you came in, and Mike, you got to thank Michael Hammond for doing all the work that he does. He's a fantastic individual. Jeffrey Pickett, Dave Young, CJ Mullen, and the rest of the staff, we appreciate all the work that they do to help us put the show out. And we'll see you again next week. Thanks for watching.